something that's come under attack progressively over the past decade or so is freedom of speech. I'm not someone who cares less about that of the religious stuff, I'm not a religious person. Unfortunately, you do get the whole thing with the sectarian divide between Rangers and Celtic, the Protestant and Catholic thing, and then the whole thing bleeds into the whole political division. For me personally, who stands back and analyses everything, as a political libertarian, I do believe in people's right to freedom of speech. And this isn't as such to do with Rangers and Celtic, but from a personal experience. And I came across in a recent argument on Facebook. This was something over a month ago or so. Rangers had played Aberdeen. Two Aberdeen supporters were arrested for racial abuse of a Rangers player, Alfredo Morelos. By no means do I condone racial abuse. It's wrong, and of course I will explain the very reason why I view it wrong to give the government that power. And of course you can see many examples for why it's a very big problem once you give government that power. It basically opens a can of worms where you end up finding innocent people come under attack for that very reason. I may never ever agree with what you say, but I will defend your right to say it. And this is important to that of a free society. And people think, well, if this is what a free society is, I don't want anything at all to do with it. Well, hang on a second here. What about the alternative, the opposite of a free society? Because I'll tell you something, it's far worse, especially when it bleeds into other areas. The reason for why it becomes a very big problem is because of context. A good example of this was a guy called Markus Meechan, who is a fellow Scot, and he was being, arrested for basically a Nazi pug video, which was a joke. And as he stated, the courts took context completely out of it. So in other words, what I'm saying is that context did not matter to the court. They say, in other words, it's how they define it. It's how they define, hate speech. So if they view something a certain given way, you will be punished for it, and your context does not matter at all. There have been issues where people have recently been arrested for things to do with gender, to do with, the transgender community, and people saying things that are deemed offensive. If saying something that's offensive is deemed a crime, then where do you draw the line? Because there could be so many things that could be deemed offensive and regarded as hate speech in that context. Let me give you a small example, and this is just a tiny example. What if I said I support control over immigration, and also because of the threat of the Islamic ideology, especially of the extremists? Does that then mean that I'm a racist? Does that then mean that because I'm a critic of Islam, and because I'm someone who supports controlling immigration, not just for safety but for economic reasons, for the laws of supply and demand, doesn't mean that everybody who is a critic of Islam and supports controlling immigration, should that then mean that they should be arrested? What if I said we should privatise the NHS? That may be, that might be deemed as offensive to a certain number of people. For example, that might be deemed offensive to that of socialists and many other people, because the first thing that comes to their head is, well, you only support a healthcare system that's only affordable for the rich, therefore I find that offensive, therefore that's regarded as hate speech. when it comes to hate speech, it's all well you personally, as a person who lives in society, who lives and works in Britain, or for whatever reason you might not be currently working, whatever, but you currently live in Britain, you're just a person, you've nothing at all to do with the government. It's all well you having your personal view of what you deem as racist, but every person's view of racism is different from another. And a good example of that is a lot of leftists who are throwing around freely this word and loosely. They throw around words like you're a Nazi or you're a fascist or, you're a racist. You could say, I support control of immigration, and they say, you're a racist. This is what I mean. Because all it takes is for someone to brand you a racist, and if the government, adheres to that, you're in trouble. The issue being is the fact that when you give the government the power to basically define what hate speech is, when you give the government the power to basically regulate what hate speech is, it's the government that gets to decide on those things, not you, or not the person who, is accusing the person of racism. But all it takes is for the government to have its own, definition of, say for example, racism. Yeah, and yourself that these politicians are far removed from, reality. They're far removed from what the people think. How often have you seen, politicians claim that you are something that you're not? They throw around these words like, oh, you're a right-wing extremist. You're right-wing this, right-wing that. And everything gets blamed on the right wing. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that once you give the government that power to regulate everything over speech, that all it takes is for the government to brand you as something that you're not? Let's say, for example, the government defines the far right as something fascist or Nazi or a Nazi. Does that mean to say that because in government's context, that the government should therefore have the right to then arrest you? And this is the danger of, where Britain is going over the past decade or so. And a lot of this came from the Communications Act in 2003, which I'm pretty sure was passed by the Labour Party. And, people can say, oh, well, it's all the Labour Party's fault, but hold on a second here. From the time that the Tory government has been in power, why haven't they, reversed this act? And when you look at who has been in government, from the likes of David Cameron to a Remainer like that of Theresa May, then you can pretty much see the reason why. We don't have someone like a Jacob Rees-Mogg. If being offensive is an arrestable offence, then ask yourself this question: what is it that offends people? You might disagree with someone, and that might be offensive to someone. For example, supporting the complete privatisation of the NHS. That might be deemed offensive, therefore an arrestable offence. As much as you might not like something that you hear, you have a choice. No one forces you to listen to it, and you have a choice over what you do with your own life. I'm not saying that, hateful things are right in what people say. I'm not saying that if someone comes out and says something really nasty, such as a racist remark, that, that it's correct. However, what I am saying is that I believe that the free market should regulate itself over hate speech for people's choice of expression. If they wish to, speak wrongly, if they wish to be racist, if they wish to be sectarian, if they wish to be whatever it is and say such hurtful and nasty things, let society regulate that for themselves. And what that means is this person is not going to be a very liked, it's not going to be a very well liked person and most certainly is not going to be very successful in business, is not going to do well for themselves when it comes to, employment. Because who's going to want to employ someone who is like that? I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you've taken anything from it, if you've got anything you would like to personally add yourself, comment in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you for watching my video, and of course I shall talk to you later. Cheers.